Hello and welcome to week 9, Applied Behavior Analysis. Today we will be going over chapter 8, the chapter over arranging consequences that increase behavior. Our lesson outcomes for this chapter are to identify the types of reinforcers and the ways to effectively choose reinforcers, to differentiate between positive and negative reinforcement. So we'll go back to those ideas that we learned in chapter 1 and dig a little deeper. Identify and correct an incorrect use of negative reinforcement and demonstrate how to use negative reinforcement during instruction. Identify components of a behavioral contract and ways to use behavior contracts. Identify variations in the delivery of reinforcement. And identify natural reinforcers. When we start off looking at chapter 8, arranging consequences that increase behavior, the first thing that the authors talk about here is reinforcement. And reinforcement sometimes gets a bad rap because people think of reinforcement as always rewards given. And that, as the authors describe, can be associated as a stereotype or a manipulative way for us to try and change someone else's behavior, when really reinforcement just describes the relationship between two environmental events, the behavior itself and then the consequence that follows that response. Many behaviors are reinforced by natural reinforcers, but for some students who struggle with maintaining that desired behavior, this may be insufficient. So, for example, a student getting a good grade on a test may be a natural reinforcer for them to study and work hard. However, for students who grades say aren't important to, that type of natural reinforcer may not be enough for them. There's some great examples of different types of reinforcements in your text on page 186. When we talk about positive reinforcement, we're talking about the contingent presentation of a stimulus immediately following a response that increases the rate of the response. So there are three words here that are really crucial to this definition of positive reinforcement. The first one is the word increases. So the word increases in this definition makes it very clear that we are talking about reinforcement. The word presentation, meaning that we are presenting or adding something. So there's that positive part. We're presenting them with a stimulus, therefore, that will increase our behavior. And then the last part of that is contingent. So another key word here in the definition of positive reinforcement. In order for this to be positive reinforcement, there has to be a contingency placed. So whatever the reinforcement may be, that reinforcement does not present itself unless or until the requested response is elicited. So if we give a student a directive to complete their math work and then they will receive 5 minutes of free time on the computer, that reinforcer cannot present itself until the student completes the math work like they've been asked to do. And we have to make sure we're super consistent on that. If not, we will definitely be teaching the student to maintain behavior in adverse ways. It's important to understand how to choose effective reinforcers. So you truly can't call an item or an event a reinforcer until you know that there is a relationship that has been established between the behavior and the consequence. Therefore, if a reinforcer or an item or event does not elicit the desired behavior, then we cannot consider it a reinforcer. Preconceived notions about what is reinforcing to students is one of the main things that can lead to failure of an intervention. We have to keep in mind that not all students are reinforced by the same things, just as we as adults are not reinforced by the same items or events. So, thinking that that all students will want candy as a reinforcement, some students are not going to respond to that. Or using a sticker chart. If a student is not motivated or reinforced by stickers, then that reinforcement or that item is not going to work well for them, and therefore it cannot be called a reinforcer. We can do what's called reinforcer sampling to help us understand what motivates students. Anytime we can give students the opportunity to choose reinforcers themselves, that typically is the best way to be able to ensure that the items or the events that we're presenting with them as a reinforcer are going to be reinforcing. But that depends on the level of functioning of your student, both age and their cognitive ability. So there are three different ways that the authors list to do reinforcement sampling. The first one is a single item presentation. So perhaps it's an item that the student chose or an item that was predetermined, maybe based on an interview from the parents or something that has been used in the past. That item would be presented to the student in order to elicit the desired behavior. So you give them a contingency of do this, then you will get this reinforcer, and you track to see how many times that works, therefore proving whether or not that item or event is truly a reinforcer. The second one, and we're going to actually practice this in class, is a choice or forced choice presentation. So in a choice or forced choice presentation, um, items are presented in pairs, and we give the contingency to the student in order to get one of these things. You need to do this first. So do this, and you can choose this or this. Which one will you choose? So complete your math work, and you can then have computer time or have a snack. And you pair different reinforcers to see which one the student will choose, and then you can kind of weed out what they will work for and what they won't. And then the last one is a multiple stimulus presentation. So this is where you have all of the items, you have several items in front of you, and the student chooses what they want to work for or what they want to gain by eliciting that appropriate behavior. So again, we give them the contingency, complete your math or whatever that may be, and then you get choice A, whatever they chose as choice A. Once they've chosen choice A and they've worked for it and they've earned it, we take choice A away. And then the next time we ask them to complete the same contingency, or that, like, let's say again, it's a set of math problems. Once they do that, then they can choose another one. And let's say they choose choice C. So then that choice is off the table. And we just go through the list until we've either hit all of them or they find nothing reinforcing anymore, and that helps us weed out which items or events are reinforcing to that student. On pages 190 through 191 of your text, there is a 9-step approach to selecting potential reinforcers. So just make sure to take a look at that. There are 9 steps there, again, to just go over how you can make sure that you're choosing the correct reinforcer for your student. Making reinforcers contingent and immediate. So it's best to use an if-then statement when telling a student what it is you want them to do and telling them how they will be reinforced. So again, if you complete your math problems, then you will get 5 minutes free time on the computer. Make sure that you're consistent with that. They have to complete whatever it is you've asked them to complete, or they have to demonstrate the appropriate behavior before you will give them that reinforcer. Also, make sure that that reinforcer is delivered immediately following the target behavior. The longer the delay you have between the desired behavior and the reinforcement, the greater the possibility will be that students will demonstrate the undesired behavior. There's a great example of this on the top of page 192. Go ahead and pause this and just take a minute to review Ms. Troutman reinforces chaos. This is a great example of how waiting too long to reinforce behavior can backfire. When we talk about types of reinforcement, there are 2 main types. The first are primary reinforcers. These are reinforcers that have a biological importance. They include things like food, liquid, sleep, shelter. Edible reinforcers are most commonly used when teaching younger students and when teaching new behaviors. They're also used with students with more severe disabilities. When we talk about edible reinforcers as a type of reinforcement, we're not talking about giving the student a chance to earn a food item. We're talking about immediately reinforcing them with food. We have to make sure that we're using these reinforcers when the student is in a state of what the author refers to as deprivation. For example, if you're giving a younger student goldfish crackers for every time they sit down in their seat, doing that directly after lunch may not be an effective strategy because the student may not be hungry. Kind of a common sense thing to throw in here, but always make sure you check a student's health records to make sure that the edible items that you're giving them are okay. Primary reinforcers also include sensory reinforcers. These are most often used with small children or children with more significant disabilities or on the autism spectrum to meet different sensory needs. And there is a nice list of those in the book on page 194. Another type of reinforcement is a secondary reinforcer. So eventually we want these to be able to replace the primary reinforcer. This can include social stimuli, whether that is praise or an opportunity to engage in preferred activities, and tokens in exchange for reinforcers. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about token economy systems here coming up. It's important to use pairing. If you've got a student that is only functioning at the level that they will respond to primary reinforcers, including a secondary reinforcer at the same time will help to eventually fade out that primary reinforcer. So, an example of this is they give a good one in the book here. When Jake behaves appropriately, his teacher may give him a bite of food and at the same time tell him what a good job he has done um, following whatever expectation that is, so that eventually he gets used to hearing that praise and also receiving the reinforcement. And eventually we can start to fade off that primary reinforcer and transition over to the secondary. Tangible reinforcers are another type of secondary reinforcement. These are concrete items that can be delivered immediately. Make sure that you're rotating items. Kids will tend to get bored if they have the same tangible reinforcer over and over. So it's good to have a small menu of those to choose from or to change them out often just to keep the student interested and engaged. Activity reinforcers are most often used by teachers. It's just the opportunity to engage in a preferred activity. On page 196 of your text, they have a huge list of activities such as being excused from a night's homework, be the first in the lunch line, be the class officer, use electronics, creating a learning center. There's lots of different things that you can use that kids are highly motivated by, and the best part is they usually don't cost you any money as a teacher. Okay, jumping into token reinforcers, also known as a token economy system. This is a type of secondary reinforcement. It is one that is widely used in special education, but can also be used in general education. So, token reinforcers are just symbolic representations that are exchangeable for an item or activity of value and of the student's choice. They're usually highly preferred reinforcers, items or activities. Otherwise, we're not going to get those students to buy into those. So there are two components to a token economy system. One is the token itself, which can actually be a physical token. Maybe it's play money, maybe it's a poker chip, whatever that may be. I've even seen teacher use like the little pom pom balls as a token. Um, and then they can also be a symbol. So some teachers use a punch card in which every punch represents a token, or they use a point system or a check mark. Lots of different creative ways to do that. And then the backup reinforcer, which is whatever they will be able to exchange those tokens for. So those are the two main components. In a token economy system, four questions that the students will have that they will want to know. The first one is how will they earn the tokens and what behavior is required. So make sure again that you're using contingent behaviors. If you do this, then you will get this. So the students know specifically what is expected of them and how they will earn the tokens. The second question students will have is what backup reinforcers can they buy with the tokens? So what items are available for them to buy? They'll also want to know how much will each reinforcer cost and when they can spend their tokens to buy the backup reinforcers. So when you're setting up your own token economy system, make sure that your plan answers those four questions because those are the four things that students will want to know and need to know. So when setting it up, you'll want to come up with a variety of items that students can buy. A lot of teachers refer to this as a classroom store. So they may have a variety of items to choose from, again, usually centered around student choice. If you have a student store that is specific to that student, then those reinforcers will obviously be specific to that student. If it's a group of students, then it may be a collective survey that you've given the class, or different students give different input on what they want in their store. So to start up, the items may be priced lower to get students to buy in, or tokens may be given more frequently. In order to get students to buy into the idea of a token economy system, we want to make sure that to start out with that they're earning those tokens and able to buy those backup reinforcers more frequently. When you're pricing things in your token economy system or your classroom store, make sure that the prices are proportionate to their actual dollar amount. And we want to find a fine balance there that students are not able to earn too quickly, but at the same time, it should not take them too long to earn. And you also have to know your students. A kindergarten student most likely is not going to be able to be successful in holding their tokens for the duration of the week and cashing only once a week. They may need to do it more frequently, as well as maybe a student with some more intense behaviors that we're really trying to modify, but perhaps an older student may be able to hold out a little bit longer in between caching, or a student who has got their behavior somewhat under control and they've been working on this system for a while. There's different strategies that you can use in a token economy system. Some choose to have designated days or times for caching, and cashing in those tokens for a backup reinforcer. Some use an immediate exchange. Some allow students to use a delayed exchange or banking of points so that maybe they can save up for bigger items. Other students, though, will hold on to those points and maybe never spend them. That might be a sign that this is not a good reinforcer for them. But by offering them tokens that maybe have expiration dates, that will encourage them to spend and take opportunity of those backup reinforcers more often. It's also important that you make sure that you keep accurate record keeping of tokens. So whether you have students keep their own bank log, um, kids will be creative, and depending on what their system looks like, we want to make sure that they're not able to falsify that information in any way. In the book, there are some examples of point cards, which pair very nicely with token economy systems. You can use point cards and associate those with points or tokens. There are some good examples there to use with elementary students, as well as some point card systems for secondary students, which again can be equated to tokens in which they can use to spend. An adaptation of a token economy system is a points and levels system. This is most commonly used with students who need a very rigorous framework for addressing behavior. We usually see this in more of our self-contained behavior programs, or when we're addressing students who have some really high need behavior issues. I know I've talked several times about the Sioux City Compass Academy program. If you're familiar with that at all, that is an example of a points and levels system. If you're familiar with the Boys Town model, also a points and levels system. I know Boys and Girls Home uses one. Pretty much any behavior specific setting is going to use some type of points and level system. So in a points and level system, students move through different levels, which are tied to different privileges and reinforcers. Um, Usually there's 3 levels. At the lowest level, a student, if they earn it, would be able to engage in basic privileges. They would have a very limited range of reinforcers, and they would have reduced choice within that reinforcement menu. They may also be earning more frequently to try and mold or shape that behavior. At the middle level, there are higher expectations of the students. Therefore, they have extended privileges, choices, and ranges of reinforcement when they are exhibiting the appropriate behavior. And then the last level, the highest level, um, is where the students have the highest expectations of them. These are typically students that have started to integrate into a general education setting. They may have more natural privileges, choices, and reinforcement that look more like a gen ed student, um, and their rate of reinforcement would probably be decreased at this point in time. But having more privileges is something that can be very rewarding to kids. Um, Also, when they have big behaviors, say an incident of physical aggression or elopement where they, run or leave campus or leave the classroom without permission, those are big behaviors that can result in a levels drop. So if they're on that third level, the highest level, it can cause them to drop levels. And then the last type of secondary reinforcer is a social reinforcer. These are proven effective in changing student behavior and teacher behavior. So, very interesting there. Students can also help us shape our own behavior. On page 204 of your text, there are some examples there of different social reinforcers. Social reinforcers must meet certain qualities in order to be effective. The praise has to be delivered contingent to the desired behavior. So, if we're trying to shape behavior, we have to make sure that we're praising specifically that behavior. The praise should also specifically highlight the desired behavior. So, we'll talk about behavior specific praise here in a second, but that's what we're talking about. And the praise should sound sincere, and kids can pick up on it very quickly if you're not sincere. So if that's something you have a hard time with, practice faking it until you make it. um, Behavior specific praise states the most specific observed desired behavior, and it's most effective when changing behavior. So when we look, if you look on the bottom of your text on page 205 at the bottom there, it gives some examples of providing behavior specific praise versus general praise. General praise would be like, good job. While some students appreciate that praise, it's not necessarily going to help shape behavior. So instead of saying good job, you can say, I really like that you finished your work on time. And that's just reinforcing the behavior that we want to see. Or I like how you stayed in your seat while I was talking. Again, that reinforces the behavior that we want to see of staying in your seat while the teacher is teaching. Behavior contracts can be an effective way to help change student behavior. In a behavior contract, what we are doing is we're placing the contingency for reinforcement just in a written format. So it's a permanent product that we can always refer back to. It takes away any of the guesswork. Anyone should be able to pick up the behavior contract and know what is expected of the student, what is expected of the teacher, and then what reinforcement system will follow. It helps to avoid a later disagreement either between teacher and student. For a student who's argumentative to say, well, that's not what you said. I was supposed to do this. I did what I was supposed to do. So when it's written, we can refer back to that and take the arguing out of it. The behavior contract should include the expectation, including the criterion for meeting that expectation. It should also include the type, amount, and method of reinforcement. So when you do this, you will get this. It should also include dates for interim and final review. So the interim dates are just a way that ensure that we as the teachers are going in and checking progress toward that student's goal, and then final review to see if they have met the terms of their contract and if they should then get the appropriate reinforcement. Some basic rules for behavior contracts: payoff should be immediate. So once they once they meet the criteria, then they should be able to receive their reward or their reinforcement. Initial contract should be rewarded in small approximations. So once you're starting a student on a behavior contract, start that goal out really small. We don't want it to be something that they are going to achieve over several months' time. They could get easily discouraged with that and not see the benefit in sticking with the contract. Reward frequently with small amounts. So, again, if we're rewarding more frequently, we want to make sure that those are small rewards. We don't want to give a student a king size candy bar, 3 times a day, whether it's with a behavior contract or um, any other type of reinforcement. If we're rewarding frequently, we need to do that in small amounts. And then um, call for and reward accomplishments. So, what that means is just basically state things in the positive. Don't write in a contract what you don't want to see, write what you do want to see. So, we're calling for that desired behavior, and then we're going to reward the appropriate behavior as well. Just don't make that confusing for the student. Say, don't do this and you will get this. It's do this and you will get this. And again, reward performance after it occurs. So, kind of tying back to that immediate payoff. One of the last things we're going to talk about here is negative reinforcement. Again, just going back to some things that we learned in chapter one. Negative reinforcement is defined as the contingent removal of an aversive stimulus immediately following a response that increases the future rate of the response. So, three key operational words here: increases. So we're still talking about reinforcement. Whatever we do as a form of negative reinforcement is still going to increase the desired behavior. But this time, instead of putting something into the environment or giving the student something, we are removing something from the student's environment. It still requires a contingency, so it's still contingent. Um, we don't remove the condition unless the student responds the way that we have requested. So um, this time you're just taking away something from the environment, and then if they respond in the correct way, then they will be rewarded. But we don't do that. We don't remove that condition until they have met that request. Negative reinforcement works best on students whose function is to avoid or escape. We can inadvertently um, maintain undesired behavior with the use of negative reinforcement if we don't understand function. So, again, just going back to the whole function piece, it's so important to understand why your student is behaving the way they're behaving. When a student's engaging in disruptive behavior, or say whining, crying, throwing a fit about an assignment, and the teacher removes it, they're inadvertently reinforcing that behavior. They may think they're doing it for the best of intentions to get the student to stop engaging in that behavior, but what they're really doing is reinforcing it. So, what we need to teach students whose main goal and whose function is to escape is we need to teach them appropriate means of escaping. So, students need to be taught a more acceptable way to communicate their needs, whether it's the need for a break or the need for assistance, and we call that functional communication. Functional communication can be either verbalizing, where we may teach the student a phrase like, I need a break, or some teachers I've even heard use little catchphrases like coffee break or timeout. Others may use a break card or a help card, like a red card to indicate I need a break, a yellow card to indicate I'm frustrated and I need some help with my work. If the student is A, not able to communicate that properly, or B, when they get frustrated, um, conversation and verbalizing words is kind of a shutdown for them. So we can use like a card instead for functional communication. So just remember, if when we're teaching students to appropriately escape from a frustration, that doesn't mean that the work goes away. It just means that it's delayed. It means in that period of time, we're allowing you to leave it for a minute. Using negative reinforcement for instruction. So again, we can teach students um, how to escape in a more acceptable way. Even as adults, we all need a timeout from time to time. We need a breather. So it's important that we teach students that that's okay. There are appropriate ways to do that. And, if I need a break from one of my students and I have to take a couple minute breather away from the room, that doesn't mean I get to just check out for the rest of the day. I still have to go back for it. So we have to teach them not only how to ask for a break, but also what we do in that break and then how we get back from break and what the expectation is. So we can actually teach those things. And we may allow a break to happen or escape from an activity, but we set the contingency for it. Rather than reacting to the student's undesired behavior, you can have a break from your work when this, and this. And perhaps it's when you show me your break card calmly, or you raise your hand and say, I need a break. However, you've set up that functional communication. And then obviously the end goal would be to increase the time between breaks and then building stamina to for engaging in whatever undesired behavior or undesired task that we're asking the student to complete when they feel the need to escape. All right, for this week, your assignments. You've got case study assignment number 4, which is your BIP behavior intervention plan. It's the behaviors through goals section. We will go over that in detail tonight in class or on Monday night in class if you're viewing this on Sunday. You will need to prepare for the week 9 check for understanding quiz, which you will take next Monday on October 26th. Read chapter 9 for next week. We're going to talk some more about reinforcement. And then make sure you prepare for the in-class discussion for week 10. And it would be a good idea to look over case study assignment number 5, which we will be working on next week in class, or rather when we're on Zoom. And we'll talk about that a little more in class. So I will see you in class on Monday night. Have a great evening.